I think the whole ordinals really brought a lot of new users and an interesting trading volume, an interesting energy of let's make another attempt to build things on Bitcoin. But the community of Bitcoin ecosystem is so huge and so diverse. There's going to be another 1 or 2 years back and forth to discuss and define this problem statement. Should we have this expressive Bitcoin programmability and which route we should take? It's a competition of technology, but more importantly, it's a competition of ecosystem in terms of TVL, on-chain transactions, use cases, and also all the kind of composability.
I'm here with Charlie, co-founder of BitLayer. BitLayer is a L2 solution for Bitcoin that achieves Turing completeness and uses BitVM. Hi, Charlie. How are you?
Hi, Sebastian. Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. So we met just a couple of weeks ago, and you were telling me about BitLayer, and like Bitcoin and Bitcoin L2s is not a topic that we've covered a whole lot on this podcast. But I'm meeting more and more Bitcoin L2 founders and people building in the Bitcoin ecosystem, and I want to get you on to get a broad view of BitLayer, the Bitcoin L2 ecosystem as a whole, and how you see that, and also BitVM, which is an important part of your stack. So, before we get started here, like your history in crypto goes back a couple of years. You were a contributor at Tezos and Polygon and Polkadot, mostly working on, I think, like marketing and community building and developer relations in Asia. Coming from that kind of part of crypto, how did you transition into Bitcoin and working on BitLayer?
Yeah, thanks for asking. Once again, really appreciate to be invited on this podcast. I think back to straight to your question, a very pivotal moment was ordinals. So for the people who don't know ordinals, it was a protocol came up by the person called Casey, who was active community builder, Bitcoin Dev. It was because of the BIP 430 in 2021. Bitcoin had an upgradation with taproot assets. So it's a new wallet type within Bitcoin, which allows people to put data on Bitcoin natively, right? And then ordinals basically is an interesting, simple protocol that allow people to write JSON data on the sets. And then basically people start talking about the native Bitcoin NFTs, which is not just a metadata on Ethereum, and then you have the IPFS kind of thing with NFT stuff on Ethereum. It gets me excited, interested, because there was the time, there was not too much innovation going on during the bear market. Obviously, you mentioned about my kind of Web3 career. Getting involved with Ethereum, that's how I joined the crypto web full-time in 2015. And I was very involved with Polkadot ecosystem, building the ecosystem Asia for them as an investor for almost 3 years. And I get involved with Polygon and Tezos in the last cycle of bull market in 2021. It was pretty interesting, and I learned a lot about NFTs, all the consumer-facing application across Web3 gaming and metaverse and so on. But obviously, quite a lot of narrative died down due to many other macro reasons. Obviously, 3-hour FTX really make things pretty bad, and market sentiment was not good at the time. A lot of Ethereum NFTs and assets really was kind of become obsolete or even dying. But this interesting ordinals protocol really gets me excited and inspired. What we could potentially create a lot of interesting assets natively on Bitcoin network, right? That was interesting. And it was a pretty big flood of like the whole Bitcoin DeFi summer kind of vibe back. So that was early 2023. So my friends was actually using their Bitcoin full node, inscribing all these. And then people started really talking about, okay, the indexers, the ordinals assets. We start educating what is ordinals to the Asia community. I was on Twitter space almost like 5 times a day, talking about ordinals, all the Bitcoin primitive, like the whole new thing called Bitcoin primitive, like BRC20, ARC20, SRC, and then later on bitmap, rare sets, all these interesting stuff on chain on Bitcoin L1. So that's there. And there was a lot of UTXO being generated. Some we could argue is like Bitcoin garbage UTXO, because Bitcoin as a network it's cash to cash, like P2P cash system, right, with UTXO model. So whatever UTXO you generate, it doesn't really have this burn mechanism. So we have like all these crazy gas fee of Bitcoin we're paying to doing some crazy mint. Obviously, we had a lot of fun minting, and I made some interesting return on that as a degen, as a trader. But the more I've been doing that and also talking to other community builder and also interacting with Bitcoin devs, the more we realize, okay, this is not the future of Bitcoin at the end game. We need scaling solutions. When we talk about okay, Bitcoin DeFi or Bitcoin DeFi Summer, we can't really do that with the lack of Bitcoin programmability on layer one. So that was kind of the gradual evolution in 2023, like from March to September. That was kind of gradual evolution. The more we deep in the rabbit hole of ordinals and Bitcoin L1, all this interesting stuff, the more we feel like we need a scaling solutions. So the second pivot moment for me to really deep dive, to really inspire myself to really deep on working on the research about BitVM and also Bitcoin scaling solution and L2 was Ordinal Summit in Singapore. So September 12th, that's where I met Domo and Casey in person. They talk about the whole interesting, crazy journey about BRC20 and Ordinals. Obviously, a lot of on-chain assets being generated on Bitcoin network and a lot of attention and energies, right? Move back from all kind of altcoin ecosystem back to Bitcoin, which was cool. But of course, a lot of garbage UDXO being generated. And then we start basically have a takeaway and after conference, like we need scaling solution around Bitcoin. We need to let all these crazy social experiments move outside of Bitcoin L1 to other meta protocols, side chains, or L2s. So that was the main takeaway for me, and then maybe for other people who attend the events as well. And coincidentally, BitVM solution, which you want to talk about, they came out as a white paper in early October last year. So the person, one of the Bitcoin researcher called Robin Linus, he was deeply involved with the Stockware and a few other kind of ZK research and Bitcoin engineering groups. So it was more like a community kind of open source kind of approach. They have interesting concept ideas. So Robin actually put this together as a white paper. It got a pretty interesting momentum in the community on Twitter. I started reading that as well together with many other people who get interested. So they started the BitVM community in Telegram. So we were kind of early members who joined as a reader. And I started reaching out to a lot of people I know actually understand this in a deep level, especially ZK, roll-ups, and so on. And that's how I reconnected with Kevin, my co-founder. And we know each other since 2021. When I was in Polygon, he was head of engineering in Huobi, building the chain called Heko, which was an ecosystem chain for the Huobi ecosystem. They had a pretty successful run as well. So we know each other at that time. And we have a very aligned technical vision about how Bitcoin ecosystem should look like. Three perimeters basically. One is the trust minimized bridge, which we're working on launching with the BVM approach. Second is the layer one verification. So that's the key difference between Bitcoin sidechain, which doesn't have the Bitcoin finality, and Bitcoin native rollup, which we're working on with the Bitcoin L1 verification. And the third thing is high throughput, high performance VM, right? Obviously now with EVM, it's old technology which we battle tested in the last 8 years, but we want to scale the to L2 environment to a higher level. So we are working on this virtual like real-time VM, which Mega Ease, Monad, and many other interesting new infrastructure solution providers actually working on as well. So these are three things, right? And obviously there's some other things which is very important as well, as to define as a real Bitcoin L2, such as the data availability on Bitcoin and all that. So the journey of BitLayer started last November, and we started as a research group, and obviously the hype of Ordinals, Babylon, a few other projects really catching up the momentum, really inspired us to really start full time working on BitLayer as well. We start fundraising. We start talking to a lot of investors, KOLs, builders. We got an interesting momentum early this year, especially after Satoshi Roundtable in East Denver. And we get a pretty interesting round on seed. We launched a V1 mainnet in early April to get a white paper. And so we start the journey of building ecosystem. So long TLDR talk about our traction statistics. BitLayer on the V1 mainnet, we have over 24 million transactions already. Over 260 projects deploy our mainnet, and at least like 50 of them are very active protocols. Some of them actually have a pretty successful fundraising as well. A few assets already minted the token assets on our chain, and we're getting close to G as well. Now we are just finishing up the Binance Wallet campaign. We as a chain, we're making profitable as we speak. Last month, we made a 650,000 gas fee revenue. So we're profitable as a business. This month we're expecting around over 700,000 gas fee revenue. Well, we are very focused on DeFi, so it's a Bitcoin DeFi focused ecosystem with pretty much all kinds of DeFi primitives. But we're a general purpose chain. We open all kinds of new ideas. So recently talking to all kinds of AI agent, some interesting new primitive.
Cool. Thank you for that. So like, talking about scaling a little bit, coming back to this, this shift around the time ordinals, took center stage. I think looking back at the Bitcoin scaling timeline, it seems to me, maybe with some exceptions of maybe like counterparty and colored coins, it seems to me that a lot of Bitcoin scaling conversations that were happening up until just a couple of years ago, like 2022, were focused on bringing scalability on chain. So increasing the block size, things like SegWit, improving signature schemes, etc., to bring scalability on the Bitcoin main chain. And there was a significant shift in building scalability off chain with L2s and restaking. What was the catalyst, do you think, for that? And from someone who's kind of like outside of the Bitcoin ecosystem, how is that change being perceived by like Bitcoin core developers and those who have kind of been around that previous wave, that previous cycle of, trying to scale Bitcoin, like in 2016 and onward, and even before that, 2015?
Yeah, I think we're not the Bitcoin core dev. We don't actually maintain the code. I wouldn't claim I'm even Bitcoin laser eyes or Bitcoin maxi. With my track record, with my kind of humble experience in the Web3 space, I was more like an ETH guy, focused on Ethereum, EVMs environment, EVM ecosystem, with Ethereum L2s like Polygon and others. But I think the whole ordinals really brought a lot of new users and an interesting trading volume, an interesting energy of let's made another attempt to build things on Bitcoin, right? Creating assets around the Bitcoin network. And obviously a lot of assets were created in 2023 during the ordinal season. So BIP 430 of this Taproot assets really I would say is one of the main catalysts, right? This happened. Before that, Bitcoin as native wallet address has not too much things you can actually explore. And besides Lightning has, this cheaper way, through state channel of payments. Not too much things actually happen, right? The previously was all like just a bunch of Bitcoin side chains, with the kind of the multi-sig kind of trust assumption model, bridging to do things. There was not too much interesting assets you can actually explore. So for us, we see a lot of interesting traction happening on Ethereum with DeFi Summer 2020, right? And also NFT assets. So for me, when I look at ecosystem, because I built ecosystem the last 8 years, it always comes from technology innovation or some interesting material protocol upgradation, which allow asset creation become very easy. And actually because of the asset creation, there's a lot of new narrative play around, right? People wants to explore the new of token mechanism, the new of tokenomics, a new of use cases. Bitcoin, because of the nature of the UTXO model, it's being the most decentralized, proof of work, secure network. It's always kind of been clunky with like 7 TPS. It's not, you can't really do that much with Bitcoin, right? So scaling solution is always there. You mentioned about a lot of interesting historical kind of attempts, and we actually list that in the website as well. All these are very important attempts in the history, but I think ordinals really become a very important catalyst, bring actually real users, right, and real people who actually willing to pay fees, some are even premium fees, right, of their hard-earned Bitcoin to them. For the Bitcoin cores, in the beginning, a lot of people, including especially Luke, right, one of the core dev, he was very big naysayer. Like he wanted to really wipe out the entire ordinals protocol, which was a huge debate between the ecosystem. The Bitcoin core, some of them actually was like, okay, let's be safe, let's wipe out the whole thing, keep Bitcoin layer 1 clean. For people who actually had a lot of interesting enjoyment, right, and also had a good return with ordinals, they were really, really panicking. They were like, okay, this is crazy. And obviously, the nature of Bitcoin community is very decentralized, right? So it's not just one corp dev saying something, the whole community have to follow him. So it has to go through a very rigorous voting system and so on. So, I mean, it's also another side effect, right? Any fundamental Bitcoin L1 innovation operation, it takes normally a couple of years. It's very slow. It's a lot of back and forth and debate, even sometimes shit talk and whatever, but it's also very needed, right? It's the whole beauty of decentralization or liberal free market in Bitcoin really inspired me and it really attracted me, because unfortunately on Ethereum, in the last couple of years, it's become more and more bureaucracy, even decentralized, with Ethereum Foundation doing a lot of the things in their agenda, right? Bitcoin is different. So I think there's still a lot of Bitcoin ecosystem naysayers. The people who just hold Bitcoin in the last 10 years doing nothing. Some of them don't really even do Bitcoin mining anymore. So they actually don't get additional feed rewards, right? During the whole ordinals renaissance. Whereas some miners, we've been talking a lot of miners like Bitmain, BitDeer, Alpha, Foundry. A lot of the mining companies actually, they do know ordinals because they're earning additional fees quite a lot last year. So they actually the economically the benefiter, right? So they are also kind of establishing some interesting efforts and campaigns to things that were on Bitcoin, right? Like especially like Marathon, which is a very major institutional US-based mining farm, which is publicly listed, right? They actually set up like an Enduro, which is a Bitcoin scaling, Bitcoin sidechain platform. So I think the mining farm is actually now getting ready and educating themselves already to explore all the things around Bitcoin ecosystem. On the other side, there's a lot of new type of builders who are not necessarily Bitcoin OGs, including myself. I don't even call myself Bitcoin OG, although I've been holding Bitcoin for quite some years. They build things in other ecosystem, and they see the frustration and also on other ecosystem, but they see the most important thing, they see the huge potential of unlocking or activating a huge amount of liquidity with the Bitcoin assets over 1.5 trillion now, right? It's a huge opportunity for them to tap into the Bitcoin liquidity and to do interesting Bitcoin DeFi stuff. So that's kind of the whole energy from others outside of the industry ecosystem to really entering this party and really make this like small echo chamber of a Bitcoin OG community bigger and more diverse. I think that's something what happened in the last 18 months. And that 18 months has been a very important and new movement compared to the last 10 years.
Yeah. Looking from the inside, like what is the level of interaction, if any, between Bitcoin L2s and the core devs? So like when you guys are, we'll talk about this later, but like you guys are building this op VM, which is reliant on some upgrades to Bitcoin Core. Do Bitcoin L2s have any weight, or is there any sort of legitimacy to their claims that like Bitcoin needs to upgrade in order for us to do this? And like, how does that interaction work with the core devs and the L2 ecosystem?
Thanks for the question. As I mentioned, the Bitcoin ecosystem has no sort of like quote unquote king. There's no Vitalik king on the Ethereum Foundation. And one person say whatever doesn't really mean that the community have to follow him. And we have a god called Satoshi, but he's disappeared, right? We don't necessarily have to follow a codev. So that's something like that. And obviously, Bitcoin L2 are also new. None of the Bitcoin L2 have over 2 years kind of their history, right? Most of them started last year in 2023, including ourselves. But traction talks, like the level of liquidity or level of TVL brings some move some needle, but that don't really. I wouldn't say it's enough and sufficient enough to really carry the weight that we can push any proposal single-handedly by ourselves. So we are very aware of the fact we have to be humble, we have to work together, and obviously debate properly, discuss properly with all the other Bitcoin OGs, Bitcoin cores, mining farms, and all that, right? So BitLayers since 2024, and today actually 2025 now, right? 2024, we sponsored all the Bitcoin Magazine conference. Bitcoin Magazine, UTXO Management is also our seed round investor. We've been talking to a lot of Bitcoin OG like Nick Szabo, Adam Back, Peter Todd, a lot of those major Bitcoin OG who have been building things around Bitcoin over 10 years. And a lot of Bitcoin mining farm, right? As I mentioned, Bitmain, Antpool, Alpha, BitDeer, Foundry, the list goes on. we've been talking and exploring and also just checking how they think about different things, and pretty much with across all the mining pools. All these mining pool, right, actually have huge weight, but at the end of the day, they are also not a they're not like a pioneer to want to pushing one thing in the agenda. So if you ask me the same question 6 months ago, I would say Upcat definitely will have a very interesting high chance to get approved maybe this year in 2025. Especially after talking to like Capital Wizard guys, like they are being very, very vocal and actively pushing this. But the more I've been talking to all the other different type of Bitcoin holders, Bitcoin OGs, even some Bitcoin cores, the more we feel like, okay, this is something very interesting, but it takes time to really have the upgradation. So the answer of BitLayer actually single-handedly moving this proposal, I don't think it's possible. We have to be very humble. We are just one humble contributor who are doing our thing, try to make some contribution. But the community of Bitcoin ecosystem is so huge and so diverse. There's gonna be another 1 or 2 years back and forth to discuss and define this problem statement. Should we have this expressive Bitcoin programmability and which route we should take? Is this going to be Upcat? Is it going to be CTL? Is it going to be others? Different people have different opinions. They sometimes have a very heated conversation, debates online, but it's all needed. For us to have this design choices of using BVM, approach, working on this chunker model of ZK stock, verifier, is based on the assumption Bitcoin, it takes time for Bitcoin L1 to have any upgradation. We might see no upgradation or soft fork at all in the next 2 years, even 4 years. So with that assumption, what we could do to just slightly move this ahead, right? So BitVM, the beauty of BitVM is that it doesn't really depend on any upgradation on Bitcoin. It's basically using the existing Bitcoin opcode to create this kind of a logic gateway to do the trust minimized bridge, to do the verification. That's the very important piece of element. I think it's really interesting, which is very permissionless. We don't actually get any approval by anybody, right? But obviously, that's like kind of community consensus we try to get from, cultivating the culture, educating the community, and so on. So up to this moment, BitLayer, we are also one of the official BitVM Alliance member, recognized in the website in the BitVM org. Together with a few other respected competitor who are doing different approach. We are still kind of in the progress launching our V2, which is 1 or 2 months away from actual code getting open source. The testnet is already launched last week. So far, so good. We're just opening for all kinds of code auditing, internal tests and so on, and onboarding new protocols to use our V2 mainnet. But yeah, I think it's all work in progress. I don't think there's a very clear conclusion. This is the path everybody will follow. And it's also a very kind of learning by doing kind of community. The more I've been talking to all these builders, the more I feel like, okay, it's a very interesting dynamic. It's always kind of competitor plus friends as well. Yeah.
Yeah. So can you explain how a BitLayer enhances Bitcoin scaling and just looking at it from a high level, and like, how is it different from the competitors? You mentioned some of these competitors, and I think, I would include in that other Bitcoin L2s and also Bitcoin restaking. I think, competes with BitLayer, at least for liquidity. Maybe on the approach and the vision is different, but how does BitLayer enhance Bitcoin scaling?
Yeah, so I will start from the pure technical side and then maybe deep dive on other elements as well. On the technical side, I think the whole vision of BitLayer is trying to build native Bitcoin L2, not just sidechain. So there's actually the definition of Bitcoin L2 become quite bit broader after the whole renaissance of ordinals and so on, right? Especially the crazy hype early Q1 last year. So a lot of sidechain actually started calling themselves also L2 as well. So BitLayer, with the BVM approach, we've been very focused on achieving the native Bitcoin L2 with Bitcoin settlement, Bitcoin finality, and then trust minimized bridge. These are the key components, right? So the three solutions on the infrastructure layer we're working on. One is the trust minimized bridge to lower down the trust assumption from the majority honest of an MPC solution to one out of n trust assumption of BitVM bridge kind of model. That's the part that we are launching. The testnet version already launched last Friday, and we're getting towards open source code, launching the V2 mainnet very soon. The second part is very important, which is Bitcoin settlement, right? The Bitcoin verification. So Bitcoin verification, the key difference, our approach compared to a few other Bitcoin L2 is we are doing the ZK stock verifier. And the reason we choose ZK stock over ZK stock is ZK stock proof is more the cost is more stable. It doesn't really volatile. And we have this new innovation called a chunker, which we are able to lower down the cost of the ZK stock proof to 10 times smaller, to divide to smaller pieces. And eventually it can be settled in the tap tree model. It's almost like a recursive inscription. So that's the way we, without actually sacrifice the security level of proof, we're able to achieve the verification with 10 times cheaper on the cost. We all know Bitcoin space, Bitcoin blocks is pretty expensive, and have the same level of security but much lower on the cost is very important. That's kind of another part of how we're unique our approach. The third part is DA, right? Data availability. I think some interesting research reports being written by Galaxy Ventures, Galaxy Research, they mentioned about DA, right? There's a Bitcoin L1 as DA. Obviously, it's most secure, but of course very expensive. BitLayer team, we don't believe it's very long-term sustainable to just put every single data availability on DA stuff on Bitcoin L1. So we have this like a hybrid model, for people who are more like whales, they want to have a high level of security, they can still choose the Bitcoin L1 as DA, but we also work with Celestia and a few other kind of Bitcoin aligned DA at the third parties for more smaller transactions. So we always try to be practical, to use, be aware of all the limitation, but achieving practical engineering sound kind of approach, and also make sure it's lower cost. So for other competitors, I think for the sidechains, BitLayer is native Bitcoin L2. We're not just sidechain. Compared to other Bitcoin L2s and like native L2s, we have a more kind of lower cost approach compared to their approach. So these are kind of the kind of technical differentiation, right? On the non-technical side, I think the strategy we take was also very interesting. So we started from V1 model, right, which is a proof of stake sidechain to bootstrap ecosystem, and actually with that we've been actively finding our product market fit by working and cultivating a lot of interesting use cases together, right? Compared to many other L2 competitors, we have much more protocols built on our chain, with users actually, when a unique wallet addresses actually doing interesting things in the use case on our ecosystem. So this community and ecosystem has been a very important intangible assets, which is very valuable. So while we are launching our V2, we have the upgradation. Some of our competitor has way less smaller community and use base than us. And at the end of the day, I think it's a competition of technology, but more importantly, it's a competition of ecosystem in terms of TVL, on-chain transactions, use cases, and also all the kind of composability. I think that's the part BitLayer has been doing pretty well, being one of the fastest growing Bitcoin Layer 2 ecosystem. I think we want to keep growing and keep educating the community. What does it look like, right? All the Bitcoin DeFi, and also really just helping all these builders of Bitcoin DeFi protocols, because at the end of the day, their success is our success. By having some successful, sound, innovative Bitcoin DeFi protocol, our ecosystem, that can justify our success and value of our ecosystem. Yeah.
How does BitLayer TBL compare to some of the other Bitcoin L2s? I think right now you guys are sitting at somewhere like 300 million. And in the
So we were number one on DeFi Llama, and so the data, including all the restaking, all the other kind of programmable Bitcoin together, at this moment we are over 718 million TBL. On the website you can see it. Then on DeFi Llama there's on the chart there's like different kind of column you can click. With
right.
the second biggest, we're second biggest one on the TVL ranking on DeFi Llama. The first biggest one is CodeOut. Obviously, CodeOut is respected competitor. They launched a token in 2023. Obviously, by having a token on major exchanges, it's helpful for them to incentivize some liquidity provider, which we might consider to do something similar, but we want to be careful with our dilution after TGE. So yeah, during this summer, we were number one on DeFi Llama. Now we're number two. Yeah, I think at the end of the day, TVL is a very important metrics, but it's not the only metrics that actually matters. There's three type of TVL. All right, we also been emphasizing this across different panels and spaces as well. There are real TVL, organic TVL being actually used on real use cases on the protocols on the ecosystem. That's the ones we want to go for, right? From the TVL from the retail, the TVL from the users and all that, right? The group providers. The second type of TVL, which is called a real TVL, but actually idle, made by just basically putting the staking in some kind of a multi-sig vault in some chains. Those are TVL kind of just not doing that much. So it's kind of a waste of capital in a bit, right? And obviously there are the third type of TVL, which we call this a bit like semi-fake TVL. So some other L2s kind of do some kind of they are self-created kind of Bitcoin assets. They claim as a TVL as well. Obviously, that's not like native Bitcoin or other kind of real assets being real, social and adopted and recognized in the community. So we don't consider that as a real TVL. The TVL actually matters, and the TVL being used on ecosystem, on use cases. So BitLayer want to keep focused on that. And the second and most important metrics is on-chain transactions. For that part, I think we've been growing pretty fast. We have each day on average over 150,000 to almost 300,000 transactions per day. So we want to really cultivate an important community who wants to use our chain for whatever various type of use cases, and creating this kind of on-chain trading community, for staking, for lending, for perp DEX, for option trading, all that kind of things. I think that is very important to have sustainable and the real organic yield for the Bitcoin holders. Yeah.
Okay, great. I want to talk about BitVM a little bit because that's a very important part of your stack. And so, I'm not super familiar with like how BitVM works and how it compares to say the EVM. So, could you explain this? How does it work within the BitLayer stack? Because BitLayer also has compatibility for the EVM and potentially other VMs.
Right.
So how is it different from the EVM, and like what are the advantages of using BitVM?
Got it. So one thing to clarify first, before I deep dive on some details, BitVM is Bitcoin verification. It's not Bitcoin virtual machine, and so it's not as like a Bitcoin version of EVM. It's actually not. It doesn't do the same thing as like Ethereum virtual machine. So I will zoom back even further. Ethereum virtual machine was created by one of the major core builder in Ethereum community called Gavin Wood, right, who was the CTO of Ethereum. He built that in a V1 version was 2015. It basically is the kind of setting stone in pretty much over 99% of the smart contract in the Ethereum ecosystem between Ethereum L1 and L2s are all using the same framework called Ethereum virtual machine. So we are EVM compatible. The reason to be EVM compatible is the beauty of that is we can onboard a lot of DeFi existing builders and protocols across all the Ethereum ecosystem on BitLayer without asking them to rebuild from scratch. They don't have to recode. We are compatible to all the existing Web3 wallets, which are EVM, like MetaMask, like OKX wallet, Binance Wallet, all these. We are integrating seamlessly with them, right? So that's very important to onboarding new users and builders from other ecosystem to us. Otherwise, it's going to be a very big hurdle, right? Some people will basically get turned off, right? They didn't want to learn a new language, new framework. But BitVM is the key module which set us different compared to other Bitcoin sidechains. So as I said, Bitcoin sidechain doesn't have the Bitcoin settlement. They don't have the Bitcoin finality, meaning all the transaction is not settled back on Bitcoin L1. So they don't actually contributing the security budget back to Bitcoin L1 and Bitcoin miners. Whereas us, we want to achieve the Bitcoin native layer 2, right? We need to actually contributing the fees, paying back to the miners through the whole verification process, right? So the whole verification is built by the BitVM approach. we started focusing on the trust minimized bridge first. So BitVM 2, and also there's two things also for people to know. BitVM as being a very important solution came up last October, right? So there's two versions now, the BitVM 1 and the BitVM 2. BitVM 1 was more general purpose, and there's some problems the community realized. And then there's like new concept called BitVM 2, which came out last December. And so far, the whole community of BitVM builders, including us, BitLayer team, has been focused on BitVM 2 and achieving the Bitcoin trust minimized bridge. So the key difference between the BitVM bridge, which is more trust minimized, compared to the MPC solution, is the MPC multi-sig bridge require the majority of the signers, no matter it's 2 out of 3, 3 out of 5, 5 or 7, whatnot, needs to be honest. If the majority of signers are not honest, it's like just minority, then the assets run through this bridging is not safe. So let's say we have over half of the signers actually become malicious, they get compromised by the hackers or whatnot, your assets actually will be stolen through the traditional multi-sig bridge approach. So obviously, for the people who want to bridge big liquidity from Bitcoin L1 to the L2s, they don't feel comfortable, right? With multi-sig bridge. In order to let them get more comfortable and to increase the level of trustless, the BitVM bridge is the way to lower down the trust assumption from majority honest to 1 out of n model. So it's very important. We only need to assume during this bridging process, only one signer in the bridging process is honest, then the bridging process is secure. So that's the trust assumption, meaning our bridge, we don't claim it's 100% trustless. We still have a trust assumption, but compared to the multi-sig bridge, which is majority honest, our assumption needs to be only 1 out of n. So when we create this bridging process, is a randomized kind of signer platform. As long as we assume there's one signer which is honest, not every single signers have been compromised or malicious, then our bridging process is secure. That's a very, very important kind of difference between the existing solution of a multi-sig. So BitLayer, the whole trust minimized bridge, we are launching, a V2 very soon, right? And then another component is Bitcoin verification, which I've been emphasizing many times. So that's the key difference between sidechains and L2. Sidechain has no Bitcoin settlement, Bitcoin finality, which they don't actually generating fees back to Bitcoin L1. L2s is going to achieve the Bitcoin finality. We need to pay the fees through our transaction fees back to Bitcoin L1 through this verification model. The challenge of building this is Bitcoin L1 has no smart contract. It's not built in, right? It's not like Ethereum and Ethereum L1. There's like a roll-up contract. So doing this verification with the Bitcoin opcode is quite an engineering challenge. So we're working on that with BitVM approach, which we want to launch that. The difference, obviously, the challenge there, we are facing the same challenge. So our approach, which we are differentiating from others, is our approach with our BitVM, our implementation. We have this chunker model, which we lower down the cost from 1 megabytes of ZK stock proof to 128 megabytes, so which is like almost 10 times smaller. So that's a very important thing, to lower down the cost without sacrificing the security level. That's kind of how we are working on using the BitVM framework. Yeah, so in a nutshell, the trust minimized bridge and the Bitcoin verification.
Okay, so BitVM allows you to do a fraud proof, where you have this like trust assumption that if one signer is honest, then you can assume that the transaction is valid. But you guys are working on, I sort of heard in your response there that you want to do a validity proof. And so this is this OpVM project that you guys are working on, but that is dependent on Bitcoin Core adding some new features, which is this OpCat. For those who are not familiar, and I include myself in this group, what is OpCat, and what does it enable really?
It's a good question. So Opcat is not a it's not a new technology. It's not a new thing. It's been in the community for almost like 12 years, and from the very beginning.
This is one of those opcodes that Satoshi had disabled, right? And then people
Yes.
now want to re-enable it.
He initiated that, and they stopped it, yeah, due to various kind of security assumption and all kind of debates within the community. Um, Clearly after BIP 430, the temporary assets, more and more people start talking about the upside of having opcode to have more expressive smart contract capability and programmability on Bitcoin L1. And so the reason we have this, like, by the way, the op VM is more like a feature. It's like a key feature or technical components. It's not a separate project. It's still part of the solution within BitLayer. The reason we want to do that is we know later down the road, Opcat will potentially get approved. We don't know when, but it's a very high likelihood this going to be as the community grows to a certain point, we want to have more programmability on Bitcoin L1 natively as well. There's a lot of interesting vocal teams has been crazily interestingly activating the community, right, and educating that. We're not the most vocal ones, but we obviously try aware of other dynamics. So we want to be future proof. So OpVM is more like a hybrid model. We combine the existing BitVM approach together with the OpCat and future the Valifa approach. So we're doing research about that, assuming.
So could you like explain? Sorry, could you explain how what does opcat do exactly? I think it stands for op concatenation. It's like the concatenation.
Yeah.
So it allows you to concatenate, basically combine different pieces of script. How does that enable validity proofs?
So the one major limitation of Bitcoin is Bitcoin actually doesn't really even have the multiplication and division, right? On the mathematical level. So in order to achieve Bitcoin ZK, validity kind of verification, you need to have the multiplication features and functions. It doesn't really have that in the existing Bitcoin code. So we need that to have that feature, right? Otherwise, it doesn't really compile. All this code doesn't really compile. So Bitcoin network cannot really recognize what it is, this like ZK proofs and so on. So we can't really have, with the existing architect, we can't really have real native ZK proofs on Bitcoin. So OpCat, the whole caveat or the whole upgradation is trying to have that feature, which is a very simple capability, which is kind of built in on all the other DLT technology or Ethereums and so on, but doesn't really have that in Bitcoin. Once we have that, we can achieve a relatively more native ZK proofs, right? So that's very important to open up that. And obviously, on the downside, people have been discussing there's security vulnerabilities, potential security vulnerabilities, once we enable that. That's the part that we kind of have to say we don't know what we don't know until this can actually get done, and the people just kind of now will play around with it, even actually hack it. So because of the fact it's just so much money and so much stake on the plate, the community has been kind of back and forth quite a bit. So it's a very important technology, which is not that complicated to get upgraded, but the implementation and impact after that is pretty huge. That's why we are still kind of in the process. We maybe get that within the next 1 year or two, maybe not. Yeah.
Okay, and when Bitcoin OS, so they did a ZK proof on Bitcoin. So they're using a different method to do this, right? Like they're using Taproot, or like is it like a less native way to do a ZK proof?
Yeah, they have a Taproot, they have an index model, and they use ZK Snark proof for that. From what I understand, their approach is still following the BitVM 1 version, which is quite different from BitVM 2. No, we are kind of still waiting for their code to be open source. So right now we can't really, we don't really understand and know what exactly their model work, because it's not open source. They claimed it's achieved. So we also need to understand how much fees they pay, to achieve that, right? Is this actually economically practical to do that in a sustainable way? So I think there's multiple team, even like Fiyama and a few other team kind of claim they achieved that. But I think there's always kind of pros and cons as well. To be honest, we are kind of respected competitor. We are all learning from each other on the approaches as well. Yeah.
Cool. Okay. Yeah. Thanks for clarifying that. So there's, some trade-offs perhaps in terms of the cost, in terms of the
Yeah.
different technologies that you're using, and you guys are really trying to do a, native proof on Bitcoin at a cost that would make it economically feasible for other L2s and, and the ecosystem basically to benefit more broadly by having very secure, very robust bridging between an L2 and Bitcoin.
Yeah. And while having a solid community, right, and also use cases. Yeah.
Of course. Yeah. So talking about the community and the use cases, yeah, let's talk a little bit about DeFi on BitLayer. So what does that ecosystem look like right now, and what are some of the things that you're excited about?
Sure. DeFi is definitely one of our major focus. We've been talking and educating the community about Bitcoin DeFi for quite a while, pretty much from the very beginning. When we launched the B1 mainnet, over 280 projects already deploy our chain. We have ecosystem leaderboards you can easily find in the bitlayer.org website. And so we sorted out the other protocols and the ecosystem project across top TVL, top transactions, and top popularities. So it's kind of the three parameters we look at, and to let people know how big its community, how those protocols doing what, right? And we have different categories across pretty much all the Bitcoin primitive across like stablecoin, DEXs, perp DEXs, option trading protocol, restaking, and obviously a lot of new like real world assets protocols now try to work with us as well. We also we are open a general purpose chain, so we are also open minded supporting NFT solutions. Some of the new solutions are AI agent, deeping as well, but obviously they're kind of still a very early stage. We have quite a lot of gaming projects. They trying to explore minting their gaming assets on Bitcoin, that kind of stuff, but on BitLayer to make it cheaper. But at the end of the day, our main strategic focus on use cases is DeFi. We believe Bitcoin DeFi has a huge potential with institutional adoption of Bitcoin ETF. Right? We are one of the first Bitcoin project invested by Franklin Templeton, the ETF issuer. We're talking actively to all the institutions like Susquehanna. We also invested by them, the major market maker and the trading groups. Guys like Galaxy, for Sarama Group, Laser Digital, quite a lot of institution has been tipping their toes, having like Bitcoin exposure and actually doing Bitcoin staking and stuff. Some are still doing the CeFi model. Some are doing like CDFi, like semi-centralized model. Some are actually doing pure DeFi kind of way. So BitLayer trying to be the go-to Bitcoin DeFi ecosystem for them to tap into, right? When they actually want to get an like on-chain native DeFi kind of yield. Talk about DeFi yield. There's like interesting amount of protocols we're trying to really support. There's quite a lot of interesting DeFi yield protocol that have been growing pretty good big momentum. One of them I should definitely mention is our number one TVL protocol called a Decent. They have an interesting kind of CDFI model approach, and also kind of a yield products. So they're offering all kinds of Bitcoin holders. They grow to over 1.3 billion TVL altogether already cross chain. In BitLayer chain, they have over 350 million TVL. So like a lot of interesting protocols. I see good momentum, good traction. You mentioned about restaking, right? Restaking on Bitcoin is definitely one of the most hyped narratives so far. With Soft Protocol just announced that they are going to list it on Binance soon. I think later this month. We're gonna see a wave of Bitcoin ecosystem project, including ourselves, to get it listed on all the exchanges and DEXs in the upcoming months. So we will see interesting assets being created. A lot of programmable Bitcoin will be tapping into all kinds of liquidity pools, and start actually using people can trading and doing earning yield around that.
Yeah, I wanted to talk a little bit about the Franklin Templeton investment and the broader institutional interest. What are the implications of of broad institutional adoptions of Bitcoin. And you, do you think that there's a risk that becomes too institutionalized? And is there a risk of institutional capture by Bitcoin, a Bitcoin institutional capture? Does that somehow place the core values and the sort of fundamentals of Bitcoin at risk? Yeah, curious to get your thoughts on that.
It's a good question. It's always certain things happen. Always has a pros and cons, right? Bitcoin ETF really being a major driver and a catalyst, right? When we to have all this buying pressure from the traditional institution TradFi companies, right? That's basically arguably the main driver why Bitcoin pumped from 20K to 100K within a year, right? So obviously it's good for the Bitcoin holders who have been hodling in the last so many years. The new 100 billion buy pressure and purchasing power from ETF has been a very important catalyst. When we talk about Bitcoin DeFi or Bitcoin ecosystem, people want to see Bitcoin price chart kind of going up together with on-chain transactions going up. It's somehow kind of correlated as well. A lot of institutions haven't really very active on DeFi yet, but because of all these like interesting protocols invested by some of the institutions as well, I think the more and more are actually tapping into the space, right? We all know CeFi is not trusted, right? It needs to be trusted. It's not like trustless, right? The sad things happen with Celsius, 3 Arrow, FTX, Luna, like list goes on, right? People don't want to repeat that, right? So like there's a lot of institutional entering the space with awareness. Fully CeFi model is not going to be something they only want to do. They want to have a semi-centralized kind of with a very institutional grade custody, such as Coinbase Prime, Anchorage, and so on, to manage some of assets in a centralized model, but have kind of an on-chain DeFi protocols to sourcing yield, actually doing trading as well, which is self-custody. So having institution to entering the DeFi space is very interesting. I think there's way more upside to having those institutional players entering the space than downside by actually bridging new liquidity, bring new users to the space, right? The downside and risks, as you mentioned, it might be the case that the regulation, especially the SEC, right, will actually start regulating and start actually requesting a lot of KYC, QIB, a lot of the decentralized DeFi protocols. That might be something which is concerning for a lot of the, more like first principle, privacy-driven Bitcoin holders, right, who don't want to go for KYC, right? They don't want the DeFi protocols. They actually need a KYC like wallets, right, being monitored by chain analysis and so on to do things, which is like a major turnoff for a lot of the Bitcoin holders, right, especially OG users. So it's like a two wave of things kind of handling, right, like wrestling as well. There's institution regulators try to do more like a CeFi model, but they bring liquidity in the users, right? They do things in a way which they need a license, they need a KYC, QIB, but they do their kind of mechanism, which certain institutional grade protocols are doing that. There's the other side, which is more like DeFi degen or native users. They don't like this. They worship their privacy over many things, many other stuff, right? So for these people, they might argue we don't need those institutions to come, right? We don't want regulator to go after us because we don't want to report to whatever authorities about certain transaction, which is just a normal transaction, right? It's like reporting every single transaction what you do on trading is just so troublesome, and it sometimes even like concerns them. So I think there's a pros and cons, but I think sometimes the industry have been evolved to this level. We are much more mainstream adopted compared to like last two cycle. Having institution new liquidity on body is definitely very valuable and very interesting. And then there's another perspective I want to bring as well. Like when people talk about, a lot of Bitcoin OGs don't want to do anything with Bitcoin. The only thing they want to do is just mine Bitcoin, hodling in their cold wallet. Whereas a lot of new users and new buyers, including those institutions and Bitcoin, ETF buyers, these are the new Bitcoin holders, right? They want access to yield. They want to tap into kind of use cases. They don't want just sitting on their Bitcoin what they hold and doing nothing in the next 10 years. So it's a new type of users who might have different demand. So those people actually want to access the yield and all kinds of yield opportunity, no matter it's CFI model, CDFI model, or pure DeFi model. So we as an ecosystem focus on Web3 native. We want to provide all these use cases for those new users. For the OGs, the ones who have been naysayer, they might don't want that, right? Like they just for some reason don't want actually any yield. They want to be a digital gold with no interest, no yield at all. It's okay. But for the new users, a lot of them have been asking, okay, I don't want to sell my Bitcoin. How to get a yield with some other trust assumption they want to sign up for, right? So I think that's the mission we want to provide as an ecosystem for those new users. Yeah.
Interesting. Thank you. So yeah, let's talk a little bit about some of the traction and things that are coming up in the next little while in 2025. So you guys recently announced a partnership with Binance Wallet, and that has been pretty successful. Where do you see adoption coming from the retail side, and how important are these partnerships with the likes of Binance, OKX, etc.?
Yeah, thanks for asking. Obviously, everybody in the crypto space pretty much know what is Binance, right? If they are one of the largest exchange in the space, access to hundreds of countries, it's one of the biggest retail adopted exchanges. A lot of exchange users are centralized exchange users. They trade, they buy and sell Bitcoin, all the other altcoins as well. It's a centralized way. Binance Wallet, whereas it's a separate Web3 wallet they create by themselves with the UID model. They actually have the license and a KYC, so we know what are those users because they're the Binance users. So the campaign really is a very important kind of education catalyst as a promotion catalyst as well. For anybody who participate in the campaign, which we have another 4 weeks to go, to tap into all the use cases, to do trading, to do all kinds of like on-chain tasks, they are able to get some rewards. The token rewards from BTR, our own BitLayer BTR token, together another 11 ecosystem project within BitLayer to give those rewards. So it's maybe not a most accurate analog, but it's imagine BitLayer is building a big shopping mall. It's like let's say a Dubai mall, right? All this ecosystem project like a vendors within the mall, right? So we just open up the mall with all the vendors trying to sell promote their products, their services. Right now, this Binance campaign is like a special holiday season, kind of a Christmas season kind of campaign as a promotion. We want to bring users, let them educate them, let them give them the rewards as a first mover, and first adopter, early adopter. Some people will stay, some people might leave after the campaign finish, but I think it's very important to really, as a catalyst, to bring more users to the Bitcoin space, because we would argue Bitcoin L2 space is very, very small. It's being a small echo chamber. We need more users. We need more builders, right? So that's kind of the campaign we've been actively doing with major Web3 wallets. So we were the first Bitcoin ecosystem project. We did it with OKX wallet on the Cryptopedia. That was 6 months ago that they brought over 500,000 users to us, 500,000 wallets. With Binance, we launched the campaign 2 weeks ago. So far, we have over 600 users, participants already. Hopefully, we will achieve over 1 million users in the next 4 weeks. That will give us a very interesting traction to attract more builders as well. At the end of the day, the builders who build DeFi use cases, they want a user base. They want to find product market fit for their products as well, right? So we want to support them as an ecosystem. Obviously, 2025, one of the major goal people all care about and they keep asking the community is TGE, right? So we're gonna launch our governance token, BTR token, which people can put into staking, become validator to access our gas fee revenue sharing as a main mechanism of utility of the token. We are launching upcoming months. Obviously, the exact date and the exact exchanges or decentralized exchange we haven't confirmed yet, but it's going to be interesting to reward all the early adopters and also some of the key ecosystem builders, because we've been, building the ecosystem since since last April. It's getting close to 1 year, so I think it's time for us to launch the token to have a successful, interesting ecosystem incentive programs and to keep growing the ecosystem. Yeah.
Cool. Well, Charlie, thanks so much for coming on the podcast. It's been great learning more about BitLayer and understanding a little bit of the technical implications, and really diving into to Bitcoin as a solution for securing loss of liquidity and bringing even more liquidity into DeFi. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Sebastian. Yeah, it was a great time.